Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. My name is Valerie Sinclair. I am 42 years old, and until recently, I was a senior analyst at Quantex Corporation, one of the largest technology firms on the West Coast. What my business card did not say is that I am the primary reason our valuations soared past $80 billion last year. Behind every so-called revolutionary algorithm, lauded in the press releases, award ceremonies, and TEDx stages was my work. But if you were to ask Julian Vance, our vice president of innovation and my direct boss, he would flash his signature smile and tell you he led the project from the ground up. He would say it with such unshakable confidence that you might even believe him. Honestly, I used to believe him too. Julian is the kind of man born for press junkets. Tall, silvering at the temples in a powerfully wise kind of way. He always wore designer suits and shoes so polished they reflected his ego. He had a charming, low-toned voice that made even nonsense sound profound. At conferences, people lined up just to shake his hand. But they did not realize that the man could not code a simple Fibonacci sequence without crashing his laptop. For 12 years, I let him take credit for my work. At first, I thought we were a team. I believed my quiet diligence and his public polish made us stronger. I was wrong. I still remember the first time I let him claim something that was not his own. It was the prototype for our predictive behavior engine, an algorithm that could forecast user intent 5 moves ahead like chess. He stood at that product launch, basking in applause, as if he had birthed the code from his own fingers. I told myself it did not matter, that the work was what mattered. I was such a fool. Every year I watched him climb another corporate rung, first to director, then senior vice president, then head of innovation. Meanwhile, I stayed a senior analyst, a title that has not changed since 2013. Every raise I got was quietly offset by the bonuses he pocketed. Every award I was too busy to attend, he went in my place, and I let it happen. I let it happen until last month. It started small, a hunch in my gut telling me the foundation was rotting. Julian began mentoring a new hire named Nadia Kovacs. Young, ambitious, straight out of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with a master's degree in artificial intelligence ethics and zero clue how corporate politics really worked. I watched him parade her around the office like some shiny trophy, feeding her lines from my roadmap deck as if he had written them himself. She looked up to him. One Friday afternoon, I overheard them in the break room. Julian was telling her that Valerie is a brilliant technician, but she lacks the vision to scale. I stood there frozen, coffee in hand, my heart a drumbeat of rage. That was the first crack. The second crack came at the annual tech summit. We had been working on an adaptive learning algorithm for months. It was my algorithm. I had written 90% of the framework, including the neural net sequencing that made it efficient in real time. And what did Julian do on stage? He pulled up my demo, skipped the technical details, and called it his latest innovation. He even winked. I did not clap, I did not even breathe, and then came the email, a forward accidentally sent to me from Julian to the Chief Technology Officer, Gerald Thorne. The text read, "Valerie is becoming too attached to her code. Might be time to sunset her role or move her into a less strategic position." That was the third crack, the one that broke me open. That night, I opened a folder I had not touched in years. Inside was everything Julian did not know existed. Backup copies of my early models, design diagrams, unregistered prototypes, and one last thing, a little black suitcase with a biometric lock. I had stored it beneath my desk marked as an archival hardware enclosure. In it was a physical drive containing my master architecture. Not the company-owned version, but my original, clean, unlicensed, and untraceable. I held that suitcase in my lap for a long time. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from knowing what I was about to do. That was 2 weeks ago. Now it is Monday. I walked into the office in a tailored navy blazer, handed in my resignation, and turned on my heel without waiting for a reply. Julian laughed. "Good luck finding another job at your age," he smirked. I smiled, not kindly. "Thank you for your wishes," I said and headed for the elevator. As I passed, he noticed the suitcase in my hand. "What is in there?" he asked. I turned, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "The future you thought you owned." His face went white the moment the elevator door slid shut. The buzz of the office faded behind me, like the background hum of a life I had left behind. But I was not done. Not until I saw the look on Julian's face shift from smug amusement to dread. I walked down the corridor slowly, carrying the box in my arms like it was fragile, though we both knew it was indestructible. I knocked on the door to his corner office and stepped inside. He looked up from his laptop, surprised. "Valerie," he said, "what is this? Your farewell tour?" I placed the box gently on his pristine glass desk and sat down. I didn't speak. I wanted him to fill the silence. He leaned back, that same slick grin creeping across his face. "Let me guess. Old files, maybe a goodbye gift. I didn't think you were sentimental." Still, I said nothing. His eyes flicked to the box, then to me. "You know," he continued, "I'll give you this. You were loyal, too loyal. But at 42, you don't stand a chance in this industry anymore." He laughed lightly. "You think anyone's going to hire you after this? A mid-level analyst with no patents, no public work, no visibility. Your name isn't even in the footnotes, Valerie. It's like you never existed." I tilted my head and finally spoke, my voice calm and cool. "That's what you're betting on, isn't it? That I'll walk away quietly, and the last 12 years of my work will be buried in your shadow with no trace I was ever here." Julian opened his mouth, but I raised one hand and set a slim silver drive on top of the box. "This," I said, "is an archive of every project I have worked on. Version histories, annotated commits, development logs with timestamps, private documentation, metadata, even internal emails. Everything from concept to deployment, including the files you presented as your own." He sat up straighter, the grin cracking at the edges. "I always kept a clean trail," I said, "because I've known for a long time that the day would come when you'd try to erase me. I didn't expect it to take 12 years, but here we are." He scoffed, trying to recover. "You think having a few files is going to change anything?" "No," I said simply. "I think having all of them already has." His fingers drummed on the desk, nervous. "You signed an intellectual property contract when you joined. Standard terms. The company owns everything." I nodded. "Everything developed through company resources, yes. But not the frameworks I built at home on my own equipment before they were ever proposed. Not the algorithms that predate their internal counterparts. Not the early iterations I documented under provisional ownership. And certainly not the integrated diagnostic system you rebranded as VanceVision that was never even submitted through the formal repository. You presented it straight from a USB stick." His face paled. "I kept the original files," I added softly. "I have comparison logs, data trails, audit timestamps, and more importantly, Julian, I have nothing to lose anymore." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I leaned forward. "You don't understand the position you're in. You think I'm walking out defeated, but what's actually happening is a transfer of power. You don't own the narrative anymore." "I do." His jaw tightened. "You wouldn't." "I haven't said what I'll do," I interrupted. "But I want you to sit with this feeling. The weight of realizing you're not in control anymore. That the person you underestimated, the one you ignored and dismissed for over a decade, holds the very threads of the empire you built your name on." I stood up, lifted the box, and turned toward the door. Before I walked out, I paused. "One more thing. You should check the backup logs on the company server. I left a little note in the metadata. Nothing malicious, just a reminder." "What kind of reminder?" he asked, voice low. "That the architecture remembers who wrote it." Then I left. His face haunted me to the elevator. Not because I felt guilt, but because I saw fear in his eyes. I was almost at the door when I heard him. Julian's voice, sharper now, trying to recover ground. "You're bluffing," he said. "You know what the company's policy says. Everything made during employment belongs to us. End of story." I turned back slow and deliberate. "That's true," I said, setting the box down. "Except you're forgetting one small thing." He folded his arms, defensive. "You signed the policy revisions back in 2015, the year after we almost lost the patent lawsuit from Vortex." I took a folder from the box and pulled out a printed copy, highlighted and annotated in my own hand. "Do you remember what we changed?" He didn't answer. I flipped to the tabbed section. Section 12, paragraph 3, subsection B. I'll read it for you. "Employees retain rights to intellectual property originated and developed outside company time or premises, provided such work does not incorporate proprietary internal resources or confidential client data." I placed it on his desk. "You signed off on this under Section 12, paragraph 3, subsection B," I said. "In fact, you insisted on the clause, saying it would encourage creativity. Your exact words. Julian stared at the paper. And here is the kicker, I continued, pulling out a second sheet. This copy of the time logs I exported from our internal network shows these modules were all developed before I submitted them, all done on my home machine during personal hours. Under 17 United States Code Section 106, I hold the exclusive rights to these initial creations. Any unauthorized corporate exploitation constitutes a clear copyright infringement, rendering your internal claims void ab initio. I looked at him. He wasn't smiling anymore. That means the original logic trees, the diagnostic skeleton, and the predictive pathway design are mine, legally and fully mine. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And it matters, I said, because everything you've built your public image on traces back to one of those designs. I could see the slow sinking realization spread across his face like spilled ink. His charm cracked, his posture shifted, and his eyes dulled. You didn't just borrow my work, I said. You built your entire career on it. The keynotes, the interviews, the awards. And now I can prove definitively that none of it was yours. He stood suddenly, hands gripping the edge of his desk. You wouldn't go public, he said, his voice wavering. You don't want a lawsuit, you don't want the drama. You're right, I said. I don't. His shoulders eased slightly, but I will if the situation demands it. There it was, the panic, a quiet, visible collapse of certainty in a man who had never once expected to be cornered. For the first time, Julian wasn't standing in front of someone desperate to keep a job. He was standing in front of someone who had nothing left to lose. I'm not here to threaten you, I said, slipping the drive into my pocket. I just wanted you to know the truth and feel what it's like when the narrative slips out of your hands. I turned to leave, but my hand paused on the doorknob. One final chapter. I didn't want him to pretend he didn't read, so I turned around. Julian's eyes widened. He tried to disguise it with a lazy lean back, arms crossed. Confident, dismissive, untouched. But the cracks were forming. I forgot something, I said, stepping back inside and picking up a thin envelope. I wanted to give you one last chance to see what you really missed. I placed the envelope in front of him. What is it? He asked, bravado gone. A ledger, I said. 18 months in the making. A record of everything you ever stole from me. He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance. I saved the emails, I said. The ones where I outlined the foundational logic behind the hybrid predictive engine. The ones where I walked you through the machine learning loop we used to cut decision latency by 60%. The ones you printed out word for word and then read aloud at the shareholders' dinner like they were your own. His face stiffened. I recorded the conversations, the video calls, the late nights when you'd ask me to explain it again, slower because you were too proud to admit you didn't understand the algorithm. That got us a 7-figure extension. I also documented how you signed off on revisions using my credentials, which constitutes forgery under California Penal Code, Section 470. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew I had receipts. I even kept the transcripts, I said softly, from the internal sessions. You remember the one where you spontaneously described our upcoming adaptive logic module using the exact phrasing I had said to you 15 minutes before. Julian's mouth parted, but no sound came. I stepped closer, calm and lethal. You always thought I was naive, didn't you? Thought I didn't see what you were doing. Thought I was just grateful to be here. He didn't answer. I was grateful for a while, I said. Until I realized I was the scaffolding you stood on while you built your cardboard castle. I started collecting proof when you deleted that first job offer from Novus Dynamics, I said. You remember the one you told me never came, except the assistant had already mentioned it. They reached out again and again, nothing in my inbox. That is when I knew you were actively committing a breach of fiduciary duty by hiding career advancements to exploit my labor. I pulled out a tablet and placed it in front of him. The contract was signed and dated 2 weeks ago with Novus Dynamics. Full recognition, public authorship, my name on the patents. They know I built it, and this time I will finally get the credit. Julian stared at the screen, the silence changing from corporate to existential. His voice came out in a rasp. You're going to Novus Dynamics? They made me an offer I couldn't refuse, I said, my tone even. Because you refused to even forward it. He stopped because there was nothing to say. You kept me boxed in here, I continued. Kept my name off the decks and the press releases. You thought if I stayed invisible, you'd shine brighter. But you forgot that shadows only exist when there's light behind them. And I've been the light this whole time. He slumped slightly, the first collapse in his image. Julian Vance, thought leader, was unraveling under the truth. You'll ruin your career, he said weakly. Going against me, I smiled, not unkindly. No, Julian, I'll finally start mine. I turned and walked out, not looking back. The narrative and the future had finally passed to me. I was halfway down the hall when I heard his voice, low and strained. Valerie, wait. I stopped and turned slowly. Julian Vance did not look like a man in control. He looked like a man realizing his kingdom had been held together by a single invisible thread that had just snapped. I walked back into his office one final time. He stood behind the desk for protection. You can't just walk out. Not now, he said. I tilted my head. Oh, Julian, I'm not walking out. I'm stepping away before it all comes down around you. He frowned, desperate confusion in his eyes. What do you mean by that? I stepped closer. The system, I said, the one you present in meetings like it's magic. It doesn't run on magic. It runs on my logic, my architecture, my patches, my predictive loops. You promised stability and speed, but you never understood the backbone. It's stable for now because I've been maintaining it quietly, nightly, while you polished your sound bites. But now, the latency issues will start. First, a few milliseconds, then more. Minor data misroutes in the network mesh, irregular forecast mapping, anomalies in user clustering. The system won't fail overnight, Julian, but it will begin to rot. And you won't know where to begin because you never opened the blueprint. He started to deny it, but I held up a hand. Oh, and your keynote next quarter, I said. Good luck. I won't be ghostwriting it or prepping your response guide. I've read your drafts, full of buzzwords. You'll stand on stage babbling about neural acceleration, and someone in the audience will ask a single targeted technical question. And you will blank. I saw the panic in his eyes. Why are you doing this? He asked. Because, I said, you built your name on my silence, and I'm done being quiet. I turned to the window. One more thing. The new algorithms I've been developing in my spare time are real, and they are better. In 6 months, once we finish integration at Novus Dynamics, they will make your entire infrastructure obsolete. You won't just lose your edge, Julian. You will lose your foundation. He did not speak. He could not. The truth was settling on him like a mountain. There was nothing he could do. For all his titles, Julian Vance never understood the thing he claimed to lead. And now that the person who did was gone, he was left in the ruins of a brilliance he never possessed. And I was already building the next world. I was gone. No internal announcement, no farewell email. Julian made sure of that. But inside the walls of that glittering tech empire, something shifted, and outside, under the spotlight, the unraveling began. At first, it was subtle. His next social media post landed with a dull thud, a jargon-filled caption attached to a photo of him standing in front of a server rack he did not know how to read. Only 5 likes, then came the quarterly press brief. He stood behind the podium, same designer suit, but his hands shook. No notes. No whispered suggestions, no Valerie in the wings. He spoke in glittering generalities about scalable intent prediction. A tech reporter from a leading technology journal raised her hand. Can you speak to the underlying improvements in your intent mapping since the 3rd quarter? Julian blinked, smiled tightly, and said, well, the real innovation lies in the synergy of layered integration. There was an audible pause, and then the typing began. Analysts and experts knew that kind of answer. It was the kind people gave when they didn't have one. 3 days later, a short piece appeared in the technology brief. Sources close to the firm suggest a recent leadership shift may have left the innovation wing rudderless. Some are starting to question whether the ideas Julian Vance champions actually originated from him. Another week, another red flag. The annual Pacifica Tech Summit, normally Julian's playground. He took the stage, microphone pinned to his lapel, grin plastered on his face like armor. Today, he said, we are entering a new phase of cognition-driven infrastructure. But when the question and answer segment opened, the tide turned. Can you walk us through the model hierarchy of your dynamic learning engine? A professor from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology asked. Julian coughed. It is a recursive multi-node paradigm. The professor frowned. Could you be more specific? We focus on outcomes, not just blueprints, Julian said with a forced chuckle. But the murmurs started. By the end, the buzz in the lobby was about what he could not explain. On social media, a thread went viral. Watch Julian Vance dodge basic architecture questions. Either he is hiding a breakthrough or he is bluffing. Spoiler, it is not the first one. I sat in my new office at Novus Dynamics, a warm cup of tea in my hands, and the sunset bleeding across the city skyline. No anger, just quiet satisfaction because the cracks had begun. Without my voice behind his words, his empire was just an echo chamber, loud but empty. It was past 11. I was home sitting barefoot, going over the final drafts for Novus Dynamics product reveal. My product, my code, my name on the header, the phone rang. I stared at the name. Julian Vance. I let it ring 3 times, then answered. Valerie, he said, his voice dry. I need your help. The slides, the diagrams, the pitch. I've rewritten the deck 3 times and nothing makes sense. He cut himself off with a frustrated exhale. I waited. Then, in a whisper, he said, I do not know what I am doing. I never did. I just memorized what you explained. I was afraid to ask questions because it would make me look small. You made me look brilliant, Valerie, and now they are asking real questions. I felt no pity, only the ache of 12 years of being invisible. No, I said softly, I am not coming back. I am not cleaning up your mess. Tomorrow when they ask questions, you will answer them yourself. Or you won't. It won't be my job to rescue you anymore. He let out a broken breath. Please, you do not understand what it feels like. I looked at the skyline. I do, I said. I lived it. And now it is your turn. Then I hung up. The conference was held in the Aurora Grand Hall. Julian Vance was slated as the closing keynote speaker. I watched the live stream. He stepped on stage, but there was a lag in his movements, a hesitation in his smile. Behind him, the slides began. Empty phrases, nothing of substance. He began, what we are building is not just artificial intelligence. It is adaptive intelligence. It went downhill fast. 15 minutes in, Dr. Beatrice Cole, AI researcher at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, asked about the neural token condensation at runtime. Julian froze, then stammered. Runtime is handled dynamically depending on signal strength. Another hand went up. Dr. Kaito Tanaka from Berkeley asked about lateral recursion. Julian claimed it was proprietary, still in early stages. Murmurs spread, and then another voice rose from the 5th row. Or maybe, the voice said, you are simply not the one who wrote any of this. Heads turned. Dr. Miriam Albright, former chair of the Algorithmic Ethics Council, stood slowly. I have reviewed your outputs, she said. What is clear is that someone else has been doing the work behind the scenes. This man did not design the systems he claims to lead. Tell us, Mr. Vance, where is Valerie Sinclair? Dead silence. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Exposed, he just stood there. When Dr. Miriam Albright said my name, there was a moment of pure stillness. Then the murmurs started. People were searching for me, the name that had lived in the footnotes, Valerie Sinclair. I stood up from my seat, smoothed the front of my black jacket, and walked down the aisle. Julian stepped back, watching his reflection disappear. I reached the podium. My name, I said, is Valerie Sinclair. For 12 years, I was the lead architect behind the behavioral logic models that power the intent prediction systems. I designed the adaptive feedback loops, the decision-weighting architecture, and the language processors. The screen behind me flickered, showing my code and diagrams. Today I would like to show you what I actually built, and I began. No slogans, just real technical language. I showed them the lattice structure that made behavioral deviation analysis possible. How we train the system on what users hovered over, what they almost selected. Prediction, I said, is about recognizing patterns people do not realize they are creating. I explained the cultural filter mesh and semantic echoes. Then came the questions, rapid fire. How did you handle entropy in the recursive model? We seeded it, I replied. Every 60 hours the model self-tests and removes 3% of its core assumptions unless revalidated by real-time data. How do you account for adversarial training risks? Distributed sandboxing across 3 isolated layers with an automatic lockout. I built the flags myself. Then came the applause, surging wave after wave until the room filled with recognition. Not for who I supported, but for who I was. Valerie Sinclair, lead architect. I glanced toward the wings. There stood Julian, alone, his face pale. He wasn't the story anymore. I was. A moderator asked if I would present at the closed technical summit next month. I nodded. I took one last look at the audience, their eager eyes, and felt something click. This was my stage. After the conference, Julian Vance vanished. Quantex Corporation tried to contain the fallout, but stocks plummeted. Investors withdrew. When the audit was completed, the patents were reissued under my name. Novus Dynamics integrated my new architecture, hitting a 96% satisfaction rating on day 3. 3 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from Julian. Valerie, I owe you an apology far greater than words can convey. I lied. I stole. I let my fear and ego turn me into someone who could not say the truth. I watched you build brilliance, and instead of honoring it, I tried to bury it because I knew I could not match it. I was never what they thought I was. I think you knew that deep down, and still you gave me 12 years of light I did not deserve. I am sorry, signed Julian. I read it twice, then set it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I did not hate him anymore. I did not need his apology or his guilt because it no longer mattered. What mattered was this: I had become who I was from the very beginning. Only now, the whole world could see it.